Good day and welcome to the Strong Ambition Podcast. I'm host Rylan Qualley, and we're going to do a deep dive on a bodybuilding update. I'm going to give you a whole bunch of feedback on how the last 2 months have gone within this bodybuilding prep. It was pretty interesting to put together this podcast episode because I thought it was going to be kind of simple, and I started to write down notes and it became a journal entry. It's like I did not realize how many things I have to discuss and that you'll find, I think, pretty interesting because it has been challenging and there's relevant topics to everyone in a fat loss phase. But then we get into the deep stuff that I'm now in, as I am currently today, I'm 11 days out by the time I listen to this because it'll be aired tomorrow. It'll be 10 days out, but very close to the show. So I'm into the thick of the diet. But there's been a whole bunch of stuff that is more just anyone on a diet can actually really appreciate and should value with their training and nutrition. But it was just really interesting to go through it because even when I was planning it out yesterday, I thought it was going to be more simplified. And then I just started listing these notes and I'm going to be talking the highlights about the training. It like last time I gave you an update was in March. So from March to April, what went well, what adjustments we had to make, right? Within the training, within the nutrition, mistakes and challenges that came up along the way. And then I'm going to dive into the more recent cut as we have slashed the calories. Believe it or not, within, just under 2 weeks, I'm at 1,400 calories today. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the cardio I'm now doing. We're going to talk about peak week, which is also really cool because I have Brett and AJ that hopped on a meeting with me, and I'm going to feature that later on in this episode. So you're going to hear them discuss their ideas on peak week strategies. So you're going to hear right from them later on, and a huge thing on mindset reflection right at the end. So this is, I'm guessing based on my notes here that I see in front of me, this is going to be a longer podcast because I wanted to get it all out. Realistically, I should have done this once a month, but hindsight's 2020, and at least now I got the notes here that, like I say, started out as notes for the podcast, turned into a journal entry, and I'm gonna have a good recording here. You're gonna basically hear me reflect on this as if it's a bit of a journal, but it's something that I still want to have some tangible lessons for you as a listener. So you're really wondering in yourself, does this apply to me? And for the first 3/4 of the cut, I think a lot of this stuff does apply to a lot of people. So let's take a little bit of a rewind to hopefully where you landed last time on the last update. The last update was at the start of March. So at this point, I was just over, not quite 2 months into the cut. And I can just, if I remember correctly, I went over some main highlights in there, but I'll tell you roughly where I was at with my different protocols as far as like the walking and training and all that stuff, and then how we kind of transition from there, and the nutrition as well. So let's dive right into this. The last point I was at there, I was doing about 14K steps a day. That was it was ironically, my minimum was supposed to be 12. And I just realized, I put it in my head that it was 14. And then I realized that I wrote down 12 and I was doing 14. So I was like, okay, that's a win. Now I was actually at the end of March, sorry, at the end of February, I was actually finishing up a long stint of dog sitting and doing a whole bunch of different dog sitting for 4 different families. So the walking came pretty natural within that. And then when I got to start just walking by myself, it was far more convenient because I could do it anywhere. It was quicker. Dogs kind of go at their own pace or they're going at an awkward pace. So that became a lot more convenient. This point, my training was still focused on lats and hamstrings. I can't really remember if I mentioned in the last podcast, but that was a note from Brett, my posing coach. He said, let's make sure that we keep those hamstrings and lats going. And that became a priority. So my 5-day workout split was lats and hamstrings with a quad finisher. We had 2 hamstring exercises in the quad finisher on the first day, then or like kind of a squat finisher. And then we had chest traps, shoulders, arms, took a day off, lats and hamstrings on the Wednesday. Then it was chest traps, shoulders, arms again, and then lats and hamstrings with a quad finisher and then a rest day. So that was kind of my split prior. Then my nutrition was 3 meals a day. I was aiming for 2,000 calories or just under, about 250 grams of protein each day, moderate to lower fat, and then decent amount of carbs. I would have a treat meal once or twice a week, trying to keep it within the calorie range as much as we can. So I'm going to dive into that's roughly the protocol was at and how we kind of continue that or how we made adjustments. So I'll start off with in March. Okay. Basically pick up where I left off from there because that's where I was at. And it was a really cool experience within March because at this point I was doing, isolations. This is something AJ got me on very early within the prep. He's like, you're bodybuilding, you're not a power lifter. We'll make this what the sport is. So you don't give yourself an out and you're going all in. And I started to enjoy it. It was actually easier. I'm just like focused on can I get really effective reps, like really, and I only need 3 to 4 challenging sets of effective reps, and you just need to make it where the muscle has a hard time moving fast. That's an effective rep. And the mind and muscle became just really this cool obsession. The one thing that I did find though, as I just mentioned how much you're doing lats and hamstrings, maybe because I was so concerned about the mind and muscle that I was going so slow, even on the contraction, the concentric. So one thing to go slow and eccentric, which again, we, postulated, me and AJ were talking, maybe that's causing a lot of muscle soreness because eccentric loading, lengthening the muscle, going with gravity, that causes most of your muscle damage. And so that was making it hard to recover, plus just the amount I was doing lats and hamstrings. Now, one of the things we were also trying to do at this point was trying to make sure my right side had a little bit more size or bring out the right side in both my quads, but for sure my right arm. And my opposing coach had mentioned just do more sets. So this made me choose a lot more single-sided movements. The downside of this, well, there's a couple. One was for sure it was more time consuming, right? Because you're doing right, left on everything. And some things are just hard to do single-sided. Like I just find like a chest fly is hard to do single-sided. And the size that's smaller, the right arm that's smaller, is a bad shoulder. So now I was also giving it a lot of extra volume. So that ended up being a bit of an issue. So later on, I changed it into more of a rest pause technique, and I'll dive into how that has been an amazing game changer for how I work my own volume, I work my own intensities. I got this from Christian Thibodeau. You basically just when you finish a set, you wait 10 to 20 seconds. That's your rest pause, and then you do those again until you hit those effective reps again. Maybe you hit only 3 more reps or 4 more reps, but those are the most important types of reps because you're having a hard time moving that weight fast. So it's like doing another set. And so what I did on my right side is I would finish, not a single sided event. So let's say I'm doing a pec fly with both arms, but I want more on my right. I would do a rest pause 10, 20 seconds, and then just do more on my right. And this made it more efficient. But as I mentioned, I had a bad shoulder, and I'll talk about later how I had to even adjust it. So later on, we did kibosh it, but for most of March, I was trying to keep up on that. The rep ranges I was choosing was usually 8 to 12, depending on the exercises. Usually, I would start at a higher end of that rep range earlier in the cycle, and then you're trying to have 2 to 3 hard sets, and then even bringing it up to 4 hard sets later on in later weeks, but that became too much. And so really had to start to find and titrate that right amount of volume, the right amount of intensity where you can still recover. And again, like the frequency of the lats and hamstrings was actually the I think one of the more challenging things. And it depended on the exercise too, I'll say for the rep range, because the rep range of doing 8 to 12 on a face pull when I have a bad shoulder wasn't really helpful because I didn't have the mechanics, I didn't have the strength to do that exercise very well in that rep range. So I'd be closer to 12 to 15 for that. So it was very important to stay up on these things as far as like injury prevention as well. So I was very big on range of motion earlier in March because this was clearly something that was going to help my posing because just certain, especially rotations and stuff like that. And I'm going to talk more about posing on a different podcast. Probably talk when I get Brett on. Brett's going to come on, my posing coach, and we'll talk more about that. But I was very big on it in March, but it became very time consuming and it definitely plateaued. So I just made sure that I was very adamant about my mobility to lift system, which I'll talk about in a bit here. But for the most part, that's how a lot of the training went within March. I was doing the single sided movement still. I was focused on the isolations. I was focused on lats and hamstrings. And, just trying to find the right amount of workload was one of the hardest things. And I'd say, like, even in the next phase, it was the same thing. The right amount of intensity is so important when you're in a calorie deficit, right? So then in April, what we did is because I found that soreness, like I'm finishing my Friday workout and then I'm sore Sunday, that's literally too much volume, right? So what we did is we kept the lower on the, or sorry, we kept the lats on the lower day for the first day of the week. So my first day of the week had, some hamstrings and lats focused. Basically, the same day. I just ended up changing it to a leg press for my squat variation movement. Then the upper body day was the same thing, but again, less single sided movements and went to more bilateral, meaning two sides at the same time. I think earlier in April, I was doing a little bit of extra rest pause, but then my shoulder was getting aggravated, as I mentioned, and it's not a great shoulder. So why would you give more volume to something that probably could use more rest, right? So I just had to really treat it well, and I'll talk about that shortly as far as my system for that. Then I would do a rest day, and then I would do a full-on lower day, which was actually kind of nice, just to have a full-on lower day and really tax it, but then give it from like Wednesday all the way to the next Sunday to rest, so I could really tackle that second lower day. Then I did chest and lats, which I really like because I do like they're kind of antagonists, meaning opposites. So when your chest is working, your lats can rest a little bit if you're doing the isolation movements more so specifically. But I feel like me doing lats and stretching my lats when I do my chest is the really big thing. They're both what you call internal rotators of the shoulder. So it's not a perfect antagonist. It's not perfectly the opposite. So my lats actually are stimulated when I'm doing bench press. But what I like about the bench press and like chin ups, for example, is I can focus a lot of my eccentrics to loosen up my lats. And then when I go to do my bench, I feel like my bench is a little bit better. So even if I'm not doing a lat day, I'll do some eccentrics or some stretching on the lats in order to have my chest feel better. And then we finished off with the shoulders, arms on the Friday and then a rest day. So that was a big transition there in our next phase into April. Now, as I mentioned, one of the major things there was like recovering was significantly better now because my lower had at least from the Sunday all the way to the Wednesday and Wednesday all the way to the next Sunday, everything had just a much better break and it was a lot better. No additional right side volume, but I would actually do some rest pause. And that was a really cool thing that I was playing around with. So the rest pause technique I got from Christian Thibodeau, and it was interesting enough, I was listening to one of his hypertrophy lectures during the prep, during one of my workouts. And he explained how important effective reps are. And he explained like using the rest pause technique and how much he liked it. And I was just like, man, this is actually genius. It just makes all the sense in the world. Like, why do so? Imagine just to make sure you understand this, like effective reps are the reps that are hard to move fast. Okay. So you have a set of 10, but the last 3 to 8, or like your rep 7, 8, 9, 10, you're like you're just naturally can't move it as fast, can't move it as fast. Maybe you have a rep or two in the tank or none. But those last 4 reps are the ones that actually stimulated hypertrophy. Those are the important ones. Now, this is hypertrophy specific. Strength is probably somewhere within that continuum, but there's different reasons to do different things for strength and power. But as far as like building muscle, like that's what you need. You need the muscle. And what's really interesting about this is that the literature is now coming out to show that anything from 5 reps all the way to like 40 reps, as long as those last 5 reps are hard to move fast, can comparably grow muscle similarly. But you don't necessarily always want to have to do 40 reps or something, right? So we try to keep it in that 8 to 12 rep range just because it's efficient, right? And again, as I mentioned, makes sense for the movement because if I'm, 8 reps of a face pull, I'm guaranteeing one of those face pulls is possibly going to be a shit thing because I'm trying to do like external rotation. I'm trying to work my external rotators from my shoulder. and it won't be ideal form. So I try to go for the appropriate rep range to get that right mechanical tension at the right time. But using the rest pause was super efficient because then you could do like kind of a light prep set, but like still a solid set where it feels like the blood's flowing. You might get a little acidity, muscle burning feeling, but just to like turn it on. And then the next set, you go a little bit heavier. Now, this could be technically a working set, meaning you are trying to find some reps near failure, or you could just be very close to it. And it's super subjective. I know this isn't guided perfectly, but I usually give people an RPE rating. Make your first one a 6 out of 10. Make your second one a 7 to 8, and make that last one an 8 to 9. And that's really your weekly RPE. What's really important is that last one. Now, what's good about this is now we have for sure that last set had effective reps. And then I would do an additional rest pause. And let's say this is week 1 because you want to have weekly progressions. Then week 2, I would do it on set number 3 and set number 2. So you do your prep set a little bit heavier in the last week. And then your second set, I would do, pretty hard second set. And I would do a rest pause. Then I would take a complete break and I would do set 3 and I would do rest pause. So in some sense, it's almost like I jumped into doing 4 sets there because I'm hitting effective reps. But the funny thing is, I very quickly learned that that's too much. And when I'm having a 2,000 calorie diet and I'm doing all this training and I'm doing all this output and everything. And so when I started doing more rest pause, it was like you come out, you're like, fuck, what a good workout and efficient. Like I don't have to do 5 sets, but I do 3 sets of something. One's light, 2 harder sets with rest pause is like doing 4 hard sets. But then my body was gassed. And if it's after a lower body day, I felt like I got hit by a truck. So I had to be very cautious and aware of what I was doing when I was using the rest pause. It was like an amazing tool, but a dangerous one. So if you use a rest pause technique, if you're in a calorie deficit, don't feel like you need to do it every set. Do it appropriate timing. Usually what I get most of my clients to do is don't do any rest pause the first week. Set your intensities that like, okay, that's a hard set. That's a hard weight. It's a hard set. And then you can basically move it into the next week where you can go light. And then the second set is hard, take a break and then do a third set. And then on the third set, do a rest pause. And you now have kind of the stance of where the rep range should be and the weight should be where you're hitting effective reps. And then I would just inch it forward a bit more on the weight. And you don't even necessarily need to hit reps closer to failure. You don't need to hit a 0 RIR reps in reserve in order to get the stimulus you want when you're in a calorie deficit. You just need a stimulus. Just make sure the muscle knows that it shouldn't go anywhere. And, I found the rest pause on set 2 wasn't necessary, basically. So that was a major adjustment that took me a while to learn. And I had to learn many times because even before we really cut the calories, it would feel like I was in a too much of a calorie deficit, but I think it was just central nervous fatigue. I remember one of the hardest days, it would just hit me like a ton of bricks. I had a really good leg day. And I just remember actually it wasn't even it was a leg day and an upper day. And then all of a sudden it snowed and it was like fucking April and it was like a blizzard. And I had to walk through it. I had to do my steps in the morning and you're walking and everything's just fried. And I'm not even in a steep calorie deficit. This is just from working too hard. And so you can work too hard in a calorie deficit and it's going to work against you. I mean, the good thing here I had is I have a huge point of accountability of competition. If you're just trying to lose body fat, it's going to be really hard to control your appetite or want to show up to the gym after a day like that. You always want to show up to the gym. And it's okay to feel like, hey, maybe I should go into a deload week. And I've even seen it with some people where they can go a 4th week hard. But I've found for myself, 1 to 2, 2 to 3 harder weeks, 1 mild week. 2 to 3 harder weeks is kind of where my body's been settling really well. And you can keep intensity even on the mild week. So what I would do is like a mini taper, which is basically, okay, can we hit heavier weights without feeling like it's really hard? And so I'm saying heavier, which means let's say ramp up on the leg press machine or one of my favorite one has been like this kind of squat pendulum machine, kind of a lever squat machine. And it's like, okay, last week it was a hard week. It was week 3. And I went really hard and I had like 6 plates on there and I grinded out like 11 or 12 reps. Well, what if I hit that weight again, but I do 6 and it feels hard enough? Like that's literally just hard enough. Well, my legs know that weight still exists in my environment. That's the way you got to look at it. Like, what is the body going to worry about, right? Because you're giving it a calorie deficit, you're taking away nutrients, right? So it's going to want to not hold on to too much muscle tissue if it doesn't have to. But then if you give this external load on the legs, oh man, we're still dealing with this. Well, we can't lose all this muscle then. So that's a bit of the idea of like we want to preserve this muscle tissue, and just for 1 week, if you just give it that stimulus, and the next week, okay, well, let's see if I can go back to doing 6 reps of that. Or what I would actually do is I would just even add. It started with like 6 plates, and then I would do 6 plates and a 10, like just add a bit more and push a little bit more on the reps. So it's why it's so valuable in this last year to actually track reps, weight, sets, and have a perception of your RPE is extremely effective for properly progressing, whether you want to build muscle or just maintain it, which, as long as you've been training for a while in a calorie deficit, that's what your goal is, just let's not lose it. So that was super helpful. And that's just took me many times, many weeks throughout this prep to remember is like, what's the right intensity? Find that right intensity. The other major thing in training that was a valuable lesson was, as I'd mentioned, I was really concerned about range of motion and trying to do extra mobility or extra stretching work first thing in the morning. It just became so time consuming. And I didn't feel like I was getting a significant benefit at a certain point. So maybe call me lazy on this, but I do plan, I'm not kidding when I say this, I plan on doing a mobility more than a month, like a whole term of mobility. I have a mobility challenge in mind in the fall, but this my mobility to lift system has actually gotten me by pretty well. And I think I wasn't putting enough time in it in the workout. And so I just made sure that I stayed focused on that. I stayed focused on the right mobility movements, and it worked well. If I didn't do it, so basically my mobility lift system, just so if you haven't seen it on my Instagram, I have a handful of mobilities that are just, wow, that's really effective for my hip and it helps my knee, and that's really effective for my shoulder. And I feel like I can bench and pull all these things really healthy if I do them. And there's dozens of different exercises you can use, but I just have my core 3 or 4 that I stick to. And if I didn't do it, I just remember this one week where I kind of rushed because I was in a mini taper. I'm like, hey, I just got to hit some heavy weight. Maybe I don't need to do all the mobility. I kind of rushed through a lower body. It was heavy. And then sure enough, a few days later, plus we got in some snow, so I had to change my shoes. My knee got way worse. I remember on the Friday, I was like limping. I'm like, oh, I hope this doesn't keep up because I've been walking around like just babying this knee. Big reason why I avoid cardio gear for most of the prep. And I mean, I was like, okay, well, I gotta take mobility serious again and make sure I do my I have this hip opener exercise. I have a hip flexor exercise that I do. And if I do them as I'm ramping up my first exercise, and it's that simple. I do my 2 or 3 mobilities that really open up my hip as I'm doing like light and a little heavier and a little heavier. And by the time I'm in my working sets for usually it was like a barbell RDL or my single leg RDL, because I'm trying to focus hamstrings first. By the time I actually got into those working sets, my hips felt open. I even also had a eccentrically loaded quad stretch that I was doing. And if I even did one set of everything, but I really focused on it, I really trying to make sure I was lengthening the muscle fiber and then went into my lift, by the time I'm doing my working sets, I actually feel great. And it's like, hey, I got this. My knee feels good. And it's not perfect, but it's significantly better than what it was. And I would do similar stuff for my upper body as well. So I had to make sure that I took my mobility to lift system very serious. And that made such a difference. So I was able to actually, keep myself going, and especially because I actually got my shoulder had a tough chest day. So everything was going good. I was actually able to do bench for a while, And that was the one power lift I had left in my program still. So I was happy. I'm like, hey, I'm getting some good progressions here. I think I even got up to 255 for many reps. And I was like, hey, I won't lose my bench press. That'd be really cool if I kept that going. But then it just took one day where I don't know what happened, because it's just like maybe it was just one extra rep. And when you're doing barbell is very fixed. And I was very used to doing powerlifting barbell, which is like you get to drive your hips every rep. And so I was trying to do, I think, too big of a range of motion where my hips can't help the initial movement. And so I was like putting my shoulder in a position it just didn't want to be in, and then trying to push into it heavy. And then, I finished the set and it felt okay, but not great. And then I went into a pec deck and I just couldn't feel good. Like it felt bad. So it even got to the point where like the next day or so, I remember trying to help my hand get my shirt over my head. So it's like, that's some impingement. Now it loosened up over time. I had to baby it, but immediately I'm like, okay, bench press is out. Like I didn't stay super like tied to that, and I ended up finding that decline bench, which sure enough was actually the best choice. I did 1 week where I did barbell, and then I found decline dumbbell. Although ironically, that was the very first way I hurt my right shoulder and probably like tore my labrum years ago. But that was because there was supposed to be like some foot holdings that I accidentally didn't realize I knocked in. So I fell on it, like kind of like into it. But for the most part, it's like when I actually set up safely, and you literally have to hold reps in reserve to get out of the decline bench because it's not very safe. So if I do it properly, I can load it properly. I can actually get a nice chest stretch, and I don't risk my chest getting injured. So it's actually been a really good exercise. So that those are some of the major lessons I'm going to say that came from like training, is like making sure that I have my mobility to lift system, making sure that I don't push too hard, use the right amount of rest pause, usually just on that last set, and you're going to feel really good. You progress week to week by just adding a little bit more weight, and know when is the right time. After about 3 weeks, go into a mini taper. You can keep the weights heavy, but you don't push as hard. And it was easy keeping even the same exercises a lot of the time, because like, hey, I already programmed this, and I heard this guy say this on Instagram. If I already have like a neurological ability to understand this movement, because that's what happens in the first month, is you're getting like the coordination pattern first, and then you build the strength. So it's not necessarily like I'm going to build more muscle, but it just made sense to keep doing a lot of the same stuff if I could. And yeah, just using effective mini tapers, I had mentioned, and not going all the way to failure, huge difference. So given the nutrition was like always holding back my recovery, it was a huge lesson. I really hope you value that in your own training. So very quickly here, let's go into nutrition. No, I say it quickly, but I should say we got a deep dive on this as well. Although I will say it's a lot more consistent. Like there wasn't a lot of iterations in it, because that was the one thing that is going to make things helpful, right? It's just 2,000 calories on average every day. My protein intake was on average around 260 grams of protein, give or take. It might go down to 240 if I had a treat meal or something like that. Now, as far as like challenges goes, there wasn't a ton. It's just the basic standard challenge of being consistent, right? And being in environments, but I had a very supportive environment. My girlfriend Angelina has been just so amazing, and the treat meal day was like such a huge difference. Eating it mindfully with her, we'd have a cookie or a cake, and it was a really cool system that I just was able to work out, where if we're going to have a treat meal that day, I take some calories out of my earlier meals, and then I put it later on. So mindful eating just in general, I remember I started this back in February, where I just sat down and ate my first cookie and just like really felt the textures, no TV, just be a part of that meal. What a difference. Because I started to realize that if you're not willing to sit down with one food and have no distractions and enjoy it, it's not that good of a food. And even my actual meals are like that. Even my breakfast, my lunch, and my dinners were always things like I could have no distractions and I would really enjoy every bite of this meal. And if you're eating something that wouldn't give you that experience, I don't think that's a good food. And I'm not going to call food bad or good, but if it doesn't taste good enough to sit down and eat it mindfully, it's not that good of a food. So that taught me a lot. And that, doing that week in and week out, just mindful eating on these treats and usually sharing it with Angelina was huge. One of the things that I didn't even realize till I talked to Jordan Sad on my podcast that binge eaters tend to want to eat alone. And I actually realized as I've been doing this so long now, having these treat meals with Angelina, that I didn't want to have it alone. I wanted to share an experience, even if she was eating her own thing. But for the most part, we would go to different places like this Cakeology place. We go to certain dessert places, bakeries. Like, hey, what are you having for your treat? How do you like your treat? What would you rate it? What do you like about it? And it's literally now such a huge experience. And I think that's super valuable, right? Your shared experience make things real. It's just such an important, valuable piece about life. There's a movie, I'm pretty sure it's called Into the Wild. And this one, and it's right at the end, he wrote in his journal. It was the last thing he wrote in his journal. And it just completely changed the way I looked at life. Is that, he was trying to escape life. He was trying to get away from things and all this stuff. And the last thing he wrote in his journal was happiness is shared. And I was just like, whoa, that just hit me so deeply because even the best moments of your life, if and you're going to try to tell someone about it to make it real, and the best moments in life are shared. It's like you can go to your friend and be like, remember that time we had? Remember that trip we had? Remember that dessert we had? That's what makes it just identifiable for you as an organism to know another organism had that experience, to know that it's a part of reality. And that's truly the way I interpret it. You feel like it's more real because you're experiencing it with someone else that agrees that it's super real. And that's what makes it more potent. That's why going to a movie and everyone gets scared or everyone laughs. It's just more contagious. This is real. This is a shared experience. So that's been huge for me. And we had, many different family events. The thing that I think is so cool about this is like I didn't dodge these family events. I went to birthday. Yeah, it was my sister's birthday party and my niece's. And they had some, it was like I asked my sister what's on the menu. All right, I'll make that work for my calories. And I weighed out some of the veggies and the chicken thighs, and then I still had room for the cake and the cupcake, and I shared it with Angelina, and it ended up being one of our favorite recipes. My mom made this pistachio white chocolate cake, and then later on, and this was a big challenge, and this is why I appreciate what's happened with me within these months on this, because I had to become very mindfully aware of emotions that would normally make me feel uncomfortable. So if I ever, like, especially growing up, my mom made cakes all the time. And being around cakes and icing and stuff, I always want to lick the spoon, eat a bunch of icing, you have the batter, all that stuff. And so my mom had already pre-made the cake. We were making a cake for Angelina's mom for her birthday, and my mom already pre-made the cake part, but for us to do the icing itself, and if I wasn't on, a structured plan, it'd be like, oh man, I'm eating a lot of that icing. And for me to make, actually put all the white chocolate or most of the white chocolate on there and do all that and just be like, hey, it's just, it's there. There's going to be food there. And we actually planned on that being our treat at night, where we had cake shavings in the white chocolate icing. And I just got to say, I was proud of myself. It's like, hey, you controlled it. You just paid attention to how your body was feeling. And this goes back to a podcast I had back in the day with Adele Spragon, where she just really pulled attention to the body. Like when you're feeling like anxious around food, it's like, hey, just pay attention to it. It's okay that it's there. It's not the end of the world. It's just the way the body is used to feeling. And so body's used to feeling anxious, like, oh, I want to eat that. I think I want to eat that. Or man, I wish I could eat that. It's like, nah, it's just a feeling. It's like you actually do. Would you really feel that much better if you ate it? And it's like you might for a second until you overate it. And so I've just managed to harness that instinct around seeing food and thinking I need it and realizing I don't. And that's been a pretty good rinse repeat. I will say, although I did pretty good making the cake when we went back and had the cake shavings, that was where I probably like came the closest to over. I did overdo my calories for sure. because we had these cake shavings. So, by the way, a cake shaving is the best part of a cake. My mom made so many cakes for people growing up. And basically, what happens when a cake rises in a pan is there's this little kind of crust on the top. So, you know how a muffin has a crust, and that's the best part of a muffin. Well, that's the best part of a cake. But when you actually have it formed in, like, uh, cylinders, like, you want it flat on the bottom. So people shave that off. And that's the tastiest part because it's got like this nice crumble to it, or nice kind of crisp to it. And my mom would have these leftovers, and just, to me, it just brings back so many memories, and to me it does taste the best. So we brought those back. There's a pistachio cake and white chocolate icing. We could just dip it. My mom gave us a bunch of the icing. We could just dip it in there. Now I tracked, a piece and a half of chocolate cake or something like that, and I legit had a hard time. I was even dipping. It's the white chocolate icing that was just so amazing. I was dipping apples in. And I'm like, hey, whoa, 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 we're getting out of control here. We're not sticking to our calories. And I had that internal urge feeling when you feel it in your body when you're almost wanting to binge. Like, I felt it there, and that was the only time I felt it on the prep. So what was kind of funny though is, like, even that day is like realizing that I never did a full refeed. So refeed is where I would increase my calories to in order to actually kind of calm my system, replenish my muscle glycogen, muscle sugar. And it's almost like a diet break where I could go from 2,000 calories. Technically, you go up to 3,000, but what me and AJ said was, if I need a refeed, I would do 2 days of 2,500 calories and then go back down. Now, what was interesting is that I remember one day I was like, oh man, I think I need a refeed. And it was just the training load. As I'd mentioned, the training load was where I would get my fatigue. But then I also started to realize, like, how good I felt after having that white chocolate cake. I'm like, I'm probably closer to 2,200 calories. Like, it was untrackable calories. Now, for the most part, it didn't bother me. I gave myself usually 400 or 500 extra calories that I could play with on these treat meals. So I could be under, I could be over 100 calories or 200 calories, but I was still losing body fat. Like, for the first 3 quarters of the prep, I definitely, like, I lost 30 pounds. So I don't think it slowed me down significantly. If anything, it made it mentally and physically easier on me, because refeeds are, I think, really healthy mentally and physically. So, um, for the most part, I did appreciate though that I needed to make my food more uniform. That was definitely one of the challenges. Was like, kind of going a little bit too random on some of these things. So, one of the things, yeah, I would just have 3 meals a day, and this was my first 3 quarters of my prep, where I had eggs and oats. AJ didn't push me on intermittent fasting. He was fine with it as long as I did protein distribution. I got my protein number up. He was good with it. I was trying to eat it a little earlier in the day because sometimes I could feel a little bit more depleted in my workouts if I didn't have food or I went too long without eating. But I would have my eggs and oats, some sort of egg patty with some salsa, some hummus earlier in the prep. I would have some meat with veggies and rice in the second meal. And that could be usually pork tenderloin or I've round. I like that they had a little bit of fat, but it was a leaner meat and very cost effective. And then a protein fruit bowl. But there was multiple variations of my protein treats, as I'll talk about how I had variety later. But I actually don't like shakes as much anymore, just because I eat them way too fast. So if I have a bowl of something, that's why I have like meats cut up in a bowl with veggies and rice. Why I have my eggs and oats, this big platter of something, because I just eat that one thing and it's more enjoyable. And especially like a shake, I find like you don't masticate, you drink it. Like, I drink fluid so fast, and it's hard to really get the texture and experience from it. So when I started doing these protein fruit bowls, it just, to me, it's hard to go back to a shake because I don't get as much enjoyment out of it. So I'll like chop up a bunch of a bunch of fruit, strawberries, usually just because they got high vitamin C for very low carbs. Apples because they got a crunch, sometimes bananas and some grapes, and many different kind of iterations of that. So that was my main go-tos. Now, the one thing that I mentioned is, like, I needed to make this more consistent. And it wasn't like terrible. It was just like I would like to have variety on the weekend, right? So sometimes I would have, well, let's do some sirloin steak. Sometimes Angelina would cook me salmon. I would do maybe like a shrimp here or there, which wasn't bad. The one day I tried to do chicken, and I had this recipe that I was kind of making up, and I had way too much garlic salt in it. and it completely threw off my weight by like 3 pounds within a few days. And that just annoyed me. I'm like, I need consistency. Now, my posing coach, Brett, gave me a great idea of making sure that you can keep your salt intake consistent by just having a preset serving size. And so it was about half a teaspoon, which ends up being about 2.5 grams of salt a day that you would add. Now, there's also salt naturally, like just for preservation in a lot of the foods. I had some in my salsa. There's in most foods that you have, there's a bit of salt, lots in meat. So even though I'm 2.5 grams plus whatever else is in the meat. Now, I used to just ad libitum add salt, which I don't think is bad. I think if you're not super worried about how consistent the salt intake is, but I was just like, let's just try to make it more uniform. And it made a difference. It really did. And so that helped me. And then on top of that, just easier to make your food choices. It's like, hey, I'm cooking pork tenderloin and then, keep it rinse, repeat. And occasionally I would have a different supper on Saturday or Sunday if me and Angelina wanted to change it up. I uh I actually found the variety was more fun within my protein treats. So my protein powder, I actually discovered that there's many, it's like just explore protein powder flavors. Instead of having your one go-to, buy like three different kinds. So the one day I was out of protein, I was like, I'm just gonna try this Oreo. And it was great. It's got like chunks of Oreo in it. And then I got some chocolate milkshake, and now I also have this birthday cake. And the birthday cake was the best surprise ever. I had no idea how much I was going to like that because it tastes like cake batter. And again, I'll go back to being a little chubby kid that my mom was making a bunch of cakes. It's like, wow, I love that flavor. Now I find I don't like it as like just a mixed shake with water as much. I like it with like the protein slop you'll see on my Instagram where I mix it with everything and it can make it into a glaze. If you mix it with cottage cheese, it actually tastes like cheesecake. So I've made muffins with glaze on it. I made crepes with glaze on it. I made a protein pancake with a glaze on it, and it's just been just fun. And what I'm looking forward to the most here after this prep is actually continuing to go down like this rabbit hole of different protein treats because I just think we have incredible technology that we can make anything with high protein now. And that's really, really cool, right? So you feel like you're having a dessert, but it's a part of your meal plan and it's serving you very well. So that's something I still had done for the last little while, but now in the final phase, we're keeping it pretty rudimentary. And yeah, so now it's just more uniform. Getting into it, it became more and more uniform. And the other major change I had to make in April, as I just found, I can't remember if it was when we actually cut the calories or right before. I think it was around the time I was cutting calories, but I did just recognize because I was, do I go to 4 meals? Do I stay at three? Do I go to four? And I'd done four before. I used to do six. Like I'm used to it, but it's just less planning. And I was worried I was going to feel less satiety because when you get like especially my meat and veggies was like I noticed when that was actually a big change I did make. I believe it was in April. When I increased my fiber intake, I found way more fullness. Like I didn't have as many veggies earlier in February, but at some point in March and February, I was having way more veggies in there. It's just like you have 300 grams worth of cooked veggies. And I love my California mix, pre-cooked, and they're just like you have so much more food volume, and it's just like, wow, this is a diet. Like that's what it feels like. So I was apprehensive as to whether or not I should actually go to four, but then I found trying to stretch the times because I got in my head very like, okay, well, I need at least 4 hours for that protein, uh, you know, proper protein distribution, which you can get too caught up in dichotomies sometimes, or just not dichotomies, but you get too caught up in the science of it. And sometimes you have to be liberal with how do you feel? Like, are you hungry? And it's like, okay. And in the essence of like, is this going to help me with energy? Because it did. Like there was one day all it took was I was waiting on Angelina to go for a workout. I'm like, why am I waiting for this meal for after? Just spread it out. And so then I had a little snack meal and then I had it on after. I'm like, well, perform better in my workout. So that worked. And then so not long after I switched into 4 meals and it was completely fine. And I really do like my 4 meals now. It just makes it where I have my eggs. Now I have two meat and veggie meals, about three hours apart. Actually, they are closer together, but I don't mind it. And one has chicken in it, one has pork in it, and then I have that protein for both still at night. And I'm not satiated now, and we'll obviously talk about that in a little bit here when we get into this final stretch phase. But even before, it was even when I had like 2,000 calories, 1,800 calories, it was actually pretty darn good. So those are main changes that kind of evolved over the time there. Um, and I believe, yeah, the only other note I wanted to make was like the less variety, the easier prep is actually super helpful. And I'm certainly going to have more variety in my diet later on within the spring and summer, but I don't necessarily desire it to be crazy. I like the structure a lot. And so the only variety is have more options, right? Because I can fit more fats in. I miss some of the fattier meats and stuff like that. When I have more room in my calories, it'll fit in a lot better. But the whole like prep in the week was way easier. It's like, okay, pre-cook your eggs for the next 5 days and then pre-cook all your veggies and and it's just like so easy. I would pre-chop all my meat. And so I'm big on bowls, as I'd mentioned. And so if I have all my meat chopped, I have all my veggies cooked. I eventually even got rid of the rice because it was just more like get the carbs from the veggies. And I had this idea given to me years ago from someone who's like, why not just eat a ton of veggies that are low calories and get the fiber and get the micronutrients, provided you tolerate it. I know some carnivores are going to say that, plants aren't good for everyone, provided that you tolerate it well. And then from there, like you're just going to feel so much more full and satiated, and it's low glycemic. Like, so it just helps so much. Then, yeah, it just made it easier. It just made it easier to load up and go anytime I needed to. There was a bit more work on the weekend, but I mean, it's a weekend and I could, do it with Angelina and watch TV and sometimes I would just break up the work. Maybe I cook it one day and then later on when I'm watching TV, I chop up, or I just need a break from my work because it's sedentary and I chop up. So that was a huge benefit to making things more consistent and more simplistic. And that's something I really encourage people to do, especially if you're getting stuck in your weights, like make some things very consistent for a while so that you could be more accurate with your calorie intake. But let's go into the tough stuff because going from March into April, 3/4 of the diet, everything there is super helpful for you to really take with you. But now we're on the dark side. When I was 5 weeks out, this is where we started getting the tough stuff. Now, I'd set myself up for this pretty well as far as training goes and nutrition goes because, we were seeing a weight loss plateau, which is very normal. After about 12 weeks of, being in a consistent calorie deficit for that long, and I arguably probably should have started my calories a little bit higher and titrated them down to make sure that I didn't get as much metabolic adaptation. In theory, I'm not 100% sure of that, but I mean, like I said, I got 30 pounds down within the first 3 months. So that's not a bad fat loss. It's not a bad weight loss. So, but now though, it's like we got to get stage lean. It's time to push it. You don't want to, put too much muscle tissue at risk early. But now if it's at risk, it's like you're probably not going to lose that much and you need to be lean. Like that's what they look for a lot at a novice stage. So this is where we were cutting calories. So we were about 5 weeks out. And it was interesting because AJ was very apprehensive of how much we need to. He's like, man, you're still making some gains here, but let's go for, 1 week at 1,800 calories, see how it works. And then we agreed on increasing the output. So 15K steps. So I went from 14K steps to 2,000. We increased the output. So more steps and then 1,800 calories. And this is where I definitely had 4 meals a day. This is where I had more appetite in between. So it gave me better energy to kind of balance my energy levels throughout. This was easier because I was going into an easy week of training. I had a mini taper at that point. So it wasn't super taxing on me. Week after that, I basically negotiated with AJ that maybe we go a little bit deeper. Let's push it a little bit harder. I don't want to not hold. I want to hold back if we don't have to. Especially because my posing coach was suggesting I would put you at 1,400 calories, And I think you could just tell my body is very resistant to losing body fat. Like I'm naturally an endomorph. It doesn't happen very easily. Some people are naturally ectomorphs. And so no matter what, it's going to be hard at the end for everyone, but there is genetic variations within that. So the week after, after that mini taper and we got used to 1,800 calories, like I felt okay. And I was like, yeah, let's go to the 1,650 because that was my old bodybuilding calories. And it worked and they're low. And I knew that that's going to be below my BMR and it's going to be tough. So we increased to 16K steps. So we are now at 1,650. And so even though AJ told me 1,700, I was aiming for 1,650 and 16K steps. And so the 1,400 calories still in my head. So this is a couple weeks ago. And so we still, challenged it. And I was talking to him about, because I'm trying to get used to this. Now it's getting tough because I had a harder week of working out. Like we're trying to challenge the weights a little bit more. And it was a few days, the first few days of 1,650 wasn't bad, but then I started getting bad in terms of I was getting a headache, felt sick, sore throat. I was like, am I actually getting a cold? And cold never came. It's just, this is what I was feeling. And I just like, having a hard time adjusting. And it was super funny because I remember being with a meeting with AJ and he's like, well, what would you rather do? Because we knew like we're at this point, I think it was about 3 weeks out. And, do you want to do more walking or cut more calories? And I'm like, I know both are going to suck. So we kind of agreed on, well, let's try to do more cardio. And so at this point, we're doing more cardio and we brought it down to 1,600 calories. Because at that point, we had initially kind of said 1,700 calories. I was doing 1,615. It was like, let's just go to 1,600 and do more cardio, bring down the steps a little bit, but equate to a high output. So 13K steps minimum of 30 minutes on the bike or elliptical. Bike, ideally, because what we really want to see is definition in the legs. It's the hardest thing to see lean. It's big muscle groups. It just wants to retain more fat there for energy. But we're hoping that just from moving the muscle fibers more, bending the knees more, they're actually going to kind of loosen up, maybe even get rid of the fat right on the leg. In theory, it probably won't. Some people want to believe you can spot reduce. Some people believe you can't. At the far end range, you don't know, right? But yeah, at very least to move the legs more. So we also made some other changes too because I was, feeling terrible. I was like, yeah, we're just going to battle through this. So some changes I also made was some great suggestion from Brett is to make sure that you have your high omegas. And I had decent omegas before. I was having them spread out throughout the day, and I kind of got passive on them, and then I like upped them again. And I went from about 2 capsules 3 times a day to 2 capsules 4 times a day. So I increased even more. I feel like that made a difference. I also had a fat burner added on. I'm going to do a whole podcast on all the supplements later on. I don't want to dive into it now because that's a long one. I want to get a more fair shot of all these things and give you a good review on it and do more research on it. But fat burners is, I'll just say, don't do them unless you're in a bodybuilding prep. I don't believe in them. But in a bodybuilding prep, you're trying to hedge your bets. And if there's even like, a few, maybe 50 calories a day, that can add up, right? And I did feel like it made a difference when I started cutting the calories. So added a fat burner and, making sure that I'm really cautious with my workout intensity. That was a really big change as well. Reps in reserve, trying to hit heavy. I wasn't even using rest pause this time because I just like, hey, unless it made sense for the exercise, like I'm like, I got a little bit more in the tank, I would do it. So started feeling better. And I think even, it was the one thing that this was actually a game changer. And I mentioned on my Instagram was the ashwagandha. So I asked Brett about it because I'd heard about it and actually it's supposed to help bring down cortisol. Well, I'm going through a lot of stress right now, right? And then I asked Brett and he's like, oh, that's my 2019 prep. And that's when he won. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go get it. And so I went and got it and I felt a difference right away. Now, that could have been a lot of things. That could have been me relaxing at the end of my foam rolling that I just felt more relaxed. But first time I took it, I felt relaxed that night and the headaches kind of went away. I also did bring up the salt intake. Brett had also suggested that. And, I think because I was so worried of oversalting that I was at this point, you're bringing down calories and carbs, you actually want to compensate for that. And so since then, I've been actually more liberal with my salt intake, upwards to 5 grams a day, even more if I think I need it, and it hasn't affected my weight loss. So the salt has made a big difference as well. And actually, for performance or working out, for sure. Like, I still feel like I can get a pump, and a lot of guys say, "Oh, I feel flat." But it's like if I have salt before, I actually feel pretty good for my pumps still. So we come to this week, and that was like we were just at 1,600 calories there. That was last week. And, I got through it and I pushed through it. And, even when I was supposed to do 30 minutes of cardio, I was doing 35 minutes, 40 minutes of cardio. Even though I was supposed to do 12K steps, I was doing 14K steps. So pushed through it, and I was feeling like, okay, well, we only got a couple weeks here left. And with Brett mentioning, 1,400 calories, what he would, recommend that he puts me on, it's like, all right, well, I don't want to look back at this being like, ah, man, I should have done it, especially if I just like, it was already sucking at this point. Like, life was hard. So I'm like, how much worse is 200 more calories? And it could be a lot worse, but maybe I can manage it. So I slowly convinced AJ, he's like, if you want to do it, let's try it. And so sure enough, we cut the calories as of Saturday. It's my fourth day of 1,400 calories. Weights are, my weight right now is lower than it's been in 10 years. So it's doing its magic. I'm at 178.6 this morning. And so and I'm really kind of pretty pumped because I'm gonna hit my bodybuilding weight class that I wanted to, which I didn't think was possible initially, but which is 176 and I think in a quarter or a half pound. But either way, it's 176. And this is my old boxing weight, 178, which I just never thought I would hit again. Now, the first day, not bad. It was a rest day, it was a recovery day. So I managed it. And then the second day was rougher. It was a fair bit rougher, but we got through it. And then day 3 yesterday, really tough start. And remember, I'm still doing cardio, by the way. And I've just increased my mental standard, even though AJ and I only said 35 minutes, I'm still doing 45. Um, but I'm adjusting. Like, it's just kind of really fascinating that when you get used to something, how mentally your body kind of settles into it. Initially, it's like, how the fuck am I going to do this? To you just get used to it. I feel more mentally strong now than I did with the 2,000 calories. But I think it's because when everything is tough, life's tough, little tough things aren't tough. And the stairs are like the best example for me. So whenever I go for walks, I go down the stairs, but I'll come up them because it is more neat. It's more an exercise. And so, most days I just don't want to deny myself any activity or steps that I can get, especially just fits in part of my life. So I come back from a walk, I come back from a workout, come back from a leg day. Like, I walk those stairs at least once a day, sometimes 3 to 4, and I'm on the 10th floor. Now, it sucks. Like, they're tiring, especially when you finish. You had a long day. Now, if it's at the end of a long day and I just felt like opting for elevator, or if I'm with Angelina, I would take the elevator. But I just found myself easily opting for the stairs. I'm like, yeah, it just sucks, but everything sucks now. And then it just like kind of dawned on me. This is how hard people do hard things all the time. Because when their life's always hard, when it's something that's kind of hard, it's not hard. And it's like that, it just really started to be very obvious to me this week that, like, okay, everything's hard, then nothing's really that hard. And it just shifted. It just really shifted in the last few days. And I had a couple of days where I was even like hypoglycemic at the end of, and those were really, really big moments because I'm going to describe it as hypoglycemic. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but basically near the end of a workout. Now, this is like where I was doing cardio at night and trying to hit some intervals. And you got to remember you're low carb. And so my blood sugars at the end of the day to actually be a bit more depleted makes sense. And then near after 30 minutes, again, you're like, that makes sense. Later on in the workout, I would kind of feel this extra sweaty, extra tired, extra fatigued, and kind of shaky. And to me, it feels like a hypoglycemic response to the body. That like rocks you. Like, it's terrible. And if you ever feel that in a workout, don't push through it. I'm not recommending you do it. But what was really fascinating is that it happened to me twice, and both times I didn't panic. I finished my intervals that I wanted to, and I took the stairs. And I was just so proud of those moments. I was like, yeah, we got this. So I'm still pushing through. And I mean, the other thing that's really helpful here is there's some major shifts here within the last couple of weeks because I'm less than a week and a half out. So I'm in a mini taper, which is super helpful because I'm not trying to hit crazy hard reps. I try to ramp up to have one hard set. And I'm also doing unloaded, a lot of concentric movements. So with like my legs, I'm doing leg press where I allow the weight to be, hit the stack and unload, push concentrically. Don't really control the eccentric too much and unload, but that still stimulates the muscle fiber that still makes sure that we're doing heavy weight, but I'm not, going to have as much muscle soreness because I'm not stretching it so much. I'm not doing the eccentric loading so much. And even on the leg press machine, I limited the range of motion. Did the same thing with my pull day. And that was actually like, so right now we're kind of doing a lower day, a pull day, a push day on arms. And then it'll be a prep, or it'll be kind of what you call a prep circuit, which is like when I'm actually at the bodybuilding show, there's going to be a little upper body circuit I'll do. And I'm going to replicate that with posing and then rest for a couple days. And then I'll repeat that next week for the actual peak week. So I'm setting myself up for this peak week to know what all those exercises are going to look like. But I'm not used to like body part splits, right? I was doing a lot of push pull, I was doing lowers, and then like kind of mixing. So my pull day felt so nice. I'm like, oh man, this is like easier, right? And then today I got to do a chest. Like it's just I missed that pump, so it was kind of nice to do that. But I'm setting myself up well where I'm tracking the weights and reps, and I know my standard for okay, if I'm going to do glycogen depletion, I ramp up the heavy, and then this is where I deplete. And so right now it's not too taxing as far as the workouts go, which is making this way easier. The hardest thing is cardio. I was doing it in the evening before, and that was mainly because I love to watch TV when I do it. And I don't want to watch TV first thing in the morning. It's not great. But the one thing is I get to have pre-workout in the morning and I perform way better. I get better workout intensity. So I'd rather go for a nice slow long walk at the end of the day. So I'm doing my cardios in the morning. As I mentioned, minimum of 35, but I'm actually doing 45 minutes a day and making it worth it. Minimum walking 13K. Yesterday I did 15K on top of the elliptical. So again, it's just this hard mindset is really cool that I'm really diving into embracing the challenge. And if it's already going to be hard, just do the hard. Do the hard thing if you got the energy and you got the time. So that's where my training's at. That's where my nutrition's at. Now, this is the really cool part where giving you a sense of the next week coming up because my training is now set up for the depletion. Now, here I'm going to toss it over into a few highlights from the discussion and interviews that I had with, it was a cool group discussion with my training nutrition coach, AJ, and my posing coach, Brett, because Brett is a prep coach himself. And they both gave me some feedback, and I asked them some different questions on how should we go into this peak week and some strategies around the peak week. So without further ado, check out this conversation, and we'll just give you a handful of highlighted clips within the discussion of the two of them. Start with AJ here. What is your protocol for glycogen depletion leading up to a prep and in the exercises and stuff like that, leading up to peak week or into peak week?
This is going to be every answer to should just be like prefaced with the thing that it depends, right? Because obviously everything is so individual to like a particular client that it's really hard to just kind of give one general rule and then just say, hey, this is going to work for absolutely everybody out there. Because I think everyone's going to be entering their peak week at a different point. Maybe some people feel they're ahead and they're trying to hold that level of conditioning in detail. Maybe some people feel like they're behind and they've missed the mark and they're somehow trying to quickly make up some ground, or so there's a bunch of different variables, I guess, that would go into that. Like just kind of a general overview of type of peak week that I've experienced as a competitor, and then helping people out would be the workouts have been a little bit lighter, usually a little bit higher volume. Legs are usually done a little bit earlier in the week, higher focus on like concentric contractions instead of like heavy eccentric loading, that's what it would kind of look like a little bit from a lifting perspective. A lot of practice, like a lot of posing practice. Find usually that posing practice not only obviously doesn't make you a better poser, but I think one thing that people miss is it helps really bring out a lot of the conditioning and detail in the muscle. I think the more that you pose and the more that you go through that, I think it really helps with that. For the you're asking about the glycogen depletion, and then obviously that's going to be followed up by someone's doing like a carb load or a fat load or whatever. And again, that's like a preference thing on the person, I think. Some people seem to respond better to fat loading. Some people seem to respond better to carb loading. I feel that's a bit of a trial and error thing for that individual person. So you don't really know until you try them out. Again, just like some general kind of guidelines for that usually is going to be, maybe 48 hours before to 24 hours before starting that process. The amounts that you're going to be having in or they're taking in are going to be, again, dependent on the individual, and just kind of updating how you look, right? Like the whole thing is predicated on how you look on stage, right? So there's not necessarily I don't like saying there's not a performance aspect to it, because anyone that's competed and has to go out and pose and stuff know that there is a performance component to it. But it is different in other sports where it's just very, being subjectively judged on your appearance. So I think another important part of that, let's say you're doing a carb load or a fat load or you're doing whatever, it should be constantly monitored between yourself and your coaches to determine like how you look and how it's going, right? To know when to maybe add more or rein it back a bit. Or so I know that's a really long-winded answer with a lot of maybes and it depends in there, but I guess like if you're looking for some general information, it would kind of look like that. Obviously there's the water in there. So usually earlier in the week, the water amount increases on your daily water. That really starts a strong flushing cycle where your body starts dumping a lot of the water, and then that water obviously gets diminished. Some people cut water like almost right out where they're literally just like wetting their mouth, to survive. I've always been more on the side of like having a little bit of water is okay. So let's say you have like maybe, up to like a liter or something like that, but that's spread out over the course of like the day before the show. It's a very small amount compared to what you've been drinking previously. But yeah, I'll stop talking now. Sorry, that's probably a really long answer.
No, you nailed the whole prep. It's really cool. The one other thing that I was curious about, just to top off here, because you really did nail most of the peak week concerns, was nutritionally the idea I had, and this is why I want to hear a critical view of it. To actually prevent me from retaining as much water is to dump even fibrous foods. And I remember before you said just have a lot of greens. So it'd be like, like broccoli and cauliflower, just things that just don't hold hardly any carbs, like don't even have carrots. But I'm just considering going relatively carnivore with like rice or potatoes or anything that's just minimal, just enough. And like, how many carbs would I have? Or would it be a crazy idea to just go a little bit more carnivore and eat protein and fat for literally a week? I would just love to know your stance on that.
So I mean, as far as the choices go of to start with, you're referencing the greens there. I feel a lot too that sometimes it depends on the individual. Like obviously a lot of times you have a higher amount of vegetable intake. I also find that like when you're prepping for a show, obviously the kind of veggies are included there in the majority of the meals. I find though too that sometimes when people get deeper into it, let's say you were get into a peak week and stuff, they can sometimes have like some gastric kind of like issues with handling like high amounts of vegetables. And you'll see people with like asparagus or broccoli or like Brussels sprouts or like certain types like that, like give them some issues, and they feel they get really like gassy and bloated, and they feel the more bloated and gassy they are, the more detail they lose like from their midsection and stuff like that. So I wouldn't say it's like a hard rule that they should be eating those. Again, that's going to be a little bit dependent on how that individual's responding to them. Some of those choices of greens, the greens are a good idea as you go through the prep, because as you go through the prep, you're spending a long time in a caloric deficit. So if you're taking also just into account your general health into the equation, obviously having greens consistently in there for all the micronutrients and that they would contain would be beneficial just for your general health, right? I don't see them as being like a competitive advantage though, like in the sport, as far as like in your peak week, you'd have to be like, you have to eat this many greens. It's going to make you look this much better. You know what I mean? I don't think it would be anything like that. So to your question, like, could you do something like you just mentioned? And yeah, probably. I don't know. I guess we'll see. Like if that's the kind of route you want to go, see how you respond to it and see how it goes. You won't really know how it goes, right? But obviously, in a very short term like that, like you're looking like a 1 week block. I don't think it's going to be a huge negative effect to your overall health. But I don't think it's like someone would make significant change in their physique if they ate greens or did not eat greens in the last week. Other than, like I said, sometimes people could have a hard time digesting certain ones, and then obviously feeling gassy and bloated, then that's not a good feeling, and you might not look as good or as tight through the midsection. But
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. So I'll toss it over to you, Brett.
Yeah.
Let's, start at the top. Like, what is going into peak week look like nutritionally, training wise? Any other variants from what AJ had mentioned?
AJ touched on it pretty darn well. Like the number one thing is peak week's different for everybody, right? Is for athlete A versus athlete B, it's going to be a completely different plan. The thing with peak week is it's no magic. Like a lot of people you hear online or even hear from other coaches, they say, "Hey, you know what? I'm going to improve X amount during peak week, and that's going to change my physique 100%." You got to be ready for stage before peak week. Number one is peak week's not going to make you stage ready. And as AJ said, depending on the athlete, like if they're ready for stage during peak week, I don't want to change a lot, to be honest. I don't want to have a lot of variables change due to water, due to types of foods they're eating, sodium intake, anything like that. If the athlete isn't ready, that's where the hokey pokey can kind of come into play of the water load, manipulating carbs super low, and changing the sodium intake daily. But it really depends on the athlete. But my typical protocol is to deplete them for the first half of the week. So let's say starting Sunday. So Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, more than likely Wednesday will be pretty low carbs. So that would be, same amount of protein they've been eating all prep, still have vegetables in there, but vegetables, as AJ said, that don't bloat or gas anyone. So anything that's not a cruciferous vegetable. So no broccoli, no cauliflower, no Brussels sprouts. I kind of go with more, peppers, beans, mushrooms, onions, asparagus for the natural diuretic effect. And then depending on the athlete, you would have the notes from all prep. Okay, do they fill up better on a 3-day carb load? Do they fill up better on a 2-day carb load? Depending on the athlete, I would start the carb up either Wednesday or Thursday, and then still keeping water high more than likely until 48 hours out, and then I would start tapering the water down. And the reason you do that is as you increase carbohydrates and you taper the water down, the glycogen is going to basically push out all the water that's between your skin and the muscle, so you're going to look drier and harder. Depending on how low I cut the water, that depends on the athlete and their look. If it's a person that stays a little bit drier and a little bit harder, I'll probably keep water pretty high because we still want water in the muscle. If it's a person that tends to hold a lot of water or a little bit softer, I'll pull the water to sacrifice, a little bit of a full look to get the conditioning. In terms of training, training's completely different too, and I think it varies from female to male too. As AJ said, I would usually start with a bigger muscle group earlier in the week. So at legs on Saturday, back on a Sunday, chest on a Monday, arms on Tuesday, shoulders on a Wednesday, and then Thursday, it might just be a quick 20-25 minute upper body pump to get the carbs moving if you started the carb load already. For females, I get them just to train as normal as possible. For bikini athletes, I don't do really any major depletion for them. I think it actually they have a harder time to refill up compared to guys. And that's kind of my protocol, and also too depends on if we're using diuretics too. Is Are we using natural diuretics such as like dandelion leaf, dandelion root, uva ursi? I've really been using the past couple of years with my athletes high dose of vitamin C. I find that's been very safe and very consistent. That there's no variables with that. So
Cool. What's the I'm just curious about, you said high vitamin C during this?
yes,
What's
yeah. So during peak week, so I usually started probably around probably Wednesday. I usually go anywhere from like 4 to 6 grams a day.
okay. Okay.
Could go up to 8, but I use that, and I choose to use the ester C one too because there's different types of vitamin C. I like the ester C because it's calcium based. It's easier on the stomach at that higher dose. And the last thing I want to do is cause any stomach distress.
Interesting. What's the logic in particular of increasing vitamin C during this phase?
Vitamin C has just been shown at a really high dose as a diuretic effect.
Oh,
So
I
it has to do specifically with, reducing cortisol, right? Is everybody is stressed before a show, no matter how confident you are, there's a little bit of nerves. High dose vitamin C is shown to reduce cortisol, which will reduce water retention, kind of like a flush.
oh wow. Okay,
So,
that's
and it's a little bit safe, not safer, but a little bit more predictable than, I'd say you're using some over-the-counter diuretics that are maybe a little bit more powerful, but they could actually make you look worse.
right. Yeah.
That's
I mean,
interesting.
that's really cool. I never knew that about vitamin C, and
Yeah.
really cool that you And titrate the water and
so
everything. So that was a really cool chat because it did really humble me on a lot of things. Like I was thinking, hey, maybe I'll do a carnivore diet within the last 2 weeks. And that way there's no fiber in me and it's just lighter on the scale. But one of the best lesson I heard from them was like, don't change a lot. Like, don't make this complicated. Like, let's make this simple. AJ talking about the concentric movements is super helpful, and that's why I love where my current split's kind of setting up as right now. And then just the simplicity of okay, make sure you refeed with things that you want. The big challenge initially to me was whether or not I was going to hit the weight I want to, but with how hard we're going into calories now, I'm feeling pretty confident we're going to be hitting below 176 with my diuretics and being able to lose the water and then be able to refeed 2 to 3 days out and to be able to get that muscle fullness back. And that's really what it's about, right? When you don't have carb in the muscle, you got to remember that glucose sits in the muscles, muscle glycogen, and it actually can look bigger if you have more of it. So if you haven't been eating a lot of carbs, which are not in the cut, you're going to look smaller. So that's why a bunch of people get really excited right before because you're going to have like rice. I already got this sorted: rice cakes, sweet potatoes. Do you want like the cleaner food? Honey, I'm going to be using. And so just things that like, hey, I'm hardly eating any carbs right now. So I think it'll be pretty exciting. But yeah, so looking forward to this, obviously. But I still got a long way to go. As you can't live too much in the future. I'm going to talk about that here with some of the mentality things. So looking forward to it though, all the same. And I think we're set up in a good position. Am I going to be perfectly stage lean? No, but I'm doing everything I can to, even the guys who are super experienced can be like, who the hell is this guy? That's my goal. I'm coming in as prepped as I possibly can. I don't want to look back and be like, I didn't own my process. I left that card on the table or something like that. I'm doing everything I can on this. So final thoughts here. As I mentioned, it's going to be a bit of a longer podcast, but it's a really important one, to be honest, right? Because this is the hardest challenge I've ever done my whole life, as far as the amount of work I've put into it, the amount of time, the commitment, the amount of mental resistance I've had to overcome between just very consistent training and nutrition, but even the posing. And I'm going to talk about that in a later podcast. But it's also super helpful that like even the first 3 quarters was amazing. Like it's the first 3 quarters, I'd say was a very healthy cut. And I wouldn't change too much, even if I was just doing a cut for like a photo shoot or just for like a client. The only thing I would change is a little less steps, so it's a bit more manageable and no posing. Like other than that, it was super manageable and got great success. I felt like it was healthy. Like it was a very healthy cut. It was just step count, train the right amount, have variety in your diet, have, as long as you have a good supportive environment. I learned a lot of new skills. I learned, you know, to enjoy that process. Like I couldn't believe how far I was going. I was like, this hasn't felt that hard at all. And that's a really important thing for fat loss. The only changes that would really happen for a regulated client would be maybe doing a bit of a maintenance phase. So like, as I started to get more fat loss resistance at that point, you'd want to go into just eating higher calories for could be a week, could be 2 weeks, kind of see how the person both physically and mentally feels. And you go closer to maintenance calories, you can bring down your steps a little bit, just titrate everything down a little bit. And then if they have a lot more weight to lose, then we go back into it. Or you could go into a build phase. But either way, it's just taught me a lot in the value of going through a transformation in the healthiest way possible. I think that was the best I'd ever done by far. I've done a lot of cuts for photo shoots, but usually they're about 4 to 6 weeks. So I didn't get as lean clearly because it was 4 to 6 weeks and I got leaner. This 30-pound cut, like that's a pretty significant cut, but it's also a significant cut done healthy. So I'm very proud of that. And the major thing I think is kind of valuable too, though, is it's not necessarily something you need to value that I lost 30 pounds and I got to like I was probably at that point 185, right? At that stage. I'm not necessarily significantly happier with my physique. Ironically, like now it's about competition. Competition like makes you like really critical of it. But on top of that, even just for daily life, it was like I'm not like that much better. And so I think there's something valuable for anyone to appreciate is like you're always going to want to chase something a little bit, but make sure that you actually do. Like I valued my physique before I started the cut. When I was, on the DEXA scan, 13% body fat, I was like, I actually don't look that bad at all. Like I could live here. And anything after that has been like, yeah, I'm improving it. And what was also really interesting was like there was an idea I think in my head of where my physique would end up, but I also just don't have the symmetry and genetics that certain people do for like a really small waist. So it's like I just not going to look the way that my mind almost imagined I would look. So now I started to accept my physique for what it is and what it was. And even some days I would look back at when I was fuller and I had more body fat on me. I'm like, I kind of like my shoulders better. I like my arms better. Yeah, the waist is like, or my abs are showing better and all that stuff, but I don't like see like a better V taper, right? So I just think that's a very valuable mindset note for people to appreciate that your leanest body fat isn't even necessarily going to be where you value your physique the most. I'm hoping that I'm going to value my physique the most in about 2 to 3 months, where I go back to finding a new norm and that has more muscle fullness, that has more body fat on me, but I keep it in the right way and in a healthy lifestyle with a little bit more freedom. So super important to know. First 3 quarters have honestly been amazing. Now to reflect on the last quarter grind, this is the more bodybuilding specific stuff, right? That I'm already going through. And I wanted to do this podcast like really right before so that you had more of this reflection of honesty and to see where I wanted to see where I'd be at and how hard it'd be to do this podcast. But when it really comes down to it, I had a pretty good feeling I was going to feel like better at this point, even though I feel like bad, but it's like you're feeling good about the bad in a sense because you're over halfway through. Like when you get halfway through a game or whatever, you're halfway through a run. And I'm over halfway now. It's like you're over the hump to some degree, even though I know this stretch is going to be really tough. But you need to get past that sticking point because when people start, and even now, when people say, "Oh, final stretch," like no, you don't use that term. I posted this on social media this week. You do not keep saying you're almost there until it's like the day before. Like it's just so not helpful for it. You know, the overall this prep has been significantly better, and this has been like at least the thick of it has been a lot. Like compared to my last one 4 years ago, I went through this suck for 13 weeks because we slashed the calories and I just did cardio. Like, and I just didn't have an idea of how to really go into this. I didn't know what I was doing. I just, I thought I was just going to slash calories and do cardio and kind of get a pump here and there. But one of the things that really changed so much, like, I mean, I've changed so much in so many years, but this is the big thing, was, owning the suffering, embracing the challenge, and being present in what I call standing in the wave, and just, really embracing what it is. Yes, it sucks, but isn't that kind of thrilling? Isn't that kind of the point of like living sometimes? Yeah, there's a tough workout. Yeah, it's a tough, life challenge, life, career curveballs. I just know that, to me, one of the worst things I had was an easy life. And I know that sounds like I'm not grateful. I'm grateful for the nice life the wonderful, wonderful life I've had. But it's been a detriment, because to actually put things on myself, I have to make things hard for myself to get harder. And so I've just created this instinct around, like, embrace the suck and own it. And, I'm so lucky I get to choose it. Like, I'm choosing these circumstances. There are people who wake up and struggle to get out of bed because of age, because of a disease, because of obesity or depression. And I couldn't imagine dealing with that every day. So any day that I'm having a hard day and I am feeling like just getting out of chairs is tough, I don't have it that bad. I take ownership for how hard it is. And I just appreciate that I have a purpose to this. The purpose is obviously to learn, to push myself, but honestly, to tell other people about how this is done, so I can really show that I take my craft extremely serious, and I want to understand and experience everything that I can about it, and to show that you can persevere, and to show that we can do really great things if we push ourselves. And to really make this a whole different experience has been like being present in it, in taking ownership for the moment. Complete and total game changer for life. Instead of asking, when is this over, you ask, what can I do well while I'm here? Because you're always going to look back at the stuff. You're always going to think, I did that, but who was I when I did it? Where I think about fights that I had. I can actually think of proudest moment of my life was a fight that I lost, but really important how it went down, because I was nervous before. Certainly, you're nervous for every fight. But there was this guy who we got to watch my competitor the day before just grill this other guy in our weight class. Not even a chance. I think they might have gone 3 rounds, but he owned him. He was a taller opponent, great kind of opponent for me, because it was a short, big banger, and he was a long, really long straight crosses, 1-2s. So it was kind of an Ali Mike Tyson thing, right? And so I went in, I came out like Mike Tyson on cocaine. I was like, I'm not gonna let this guy push me around. And I think even my sparring partner said, "Oh man, you're gonna have a hard time with him." Like, got in my head. I didn't pace it. So first round I had it. Second round, and he was tough. He had a good guard, so he blocked well. And I like just drained myself. Second round, I just hit a wall. Like, I was so gassed. Third round, I had nothing left. Like, his punches didn't hurt me. I just couldn't feel anything. I was so tired. And then within the last 30 seconds of the fight, I just remember this moment so clearly, so vividly, because I could hardly breathe, numb all over. I had no energy in me, and I'm standing from this guy hitting me. Hold my hands were up at least, but he's hitting me. And it's like I don't feel the pain because I'm so tired. And I have this voice in me say, "Man, I just don't want to be here." And then a deeper voice came over and said, "You have no choice. Throw." It was incredible. It was just something so deep, raw, and primal. And then you'll see the tape if I ever pull it out. I just banged him punch for punch for the next 25 seconds. Like, I didn't know where that came from. And so go back, like, who was I? That's what matters to me. I might be depleted. I might, just struggle through things. I might not do things great all the time. But what really helps too is wanting to be here despite not feeling like it's easy to be here. hey, I want to take the stairs. No, I don't think it's going to feel good, but I want to be the person that's present. And it's so important that I take it one task at a time. When people say, "Oh, you're almost there," I don't like that because I have, 11 days to go, but I have 24 tasks in a day that are all going to be really tough. So I would rather think of the fact that I have my very next task that I'm going to own. Because otherwise, if I do 11 times 24, that's a lot of things to add up, right? So it's like, oh, you're almost, no, I'm not. I'm not almost there. And that's okay because I'm going to be present for every task on the way. That's why I took my time on this podcast and I literally just writing out the storyline for it took me over an hour and a half because I'm taking each task at a time. And this is where my word of the year has just been so helpful. So I'm not sure if you remember me ever talking about this again, or mentioned on the podcast, but I've mentioned it on my social media. But I always have a word of the year, and this is just a theme word that you can come back to, and it just means a whole bunch of behaviors too, but something that you really need to grow into. So the first time I think I did this, it was just the word listen, and because I'm a talker, certainly I've been ranting the whole time, but I had to become a better listener for my girlfriend, for my family, but for definitely for my clients. It's just like listen, ask questions, listen, and just listen. And if I use that, it made me a better communicator. Made me want to ask more questions. And I carried it over and I carried it over for a while. And I should and by the way, I'm not usually done even after a year. But instead of having this list of like New Year's resolutions, it's just one word. What can you really lean into this year to add a shift of character? And so that was super helpful. And then last year it was grind. That was a big one for me because I knew I was going into this mastermind group that was going to make me uncomfortable, do things I didn't want to do. And I had to grind in this new social media space. And yeah, basically had this feeling of like, hey, parts of your job you're not going to like. And from a lot of my like fitness career, I loved my job. It was not hard to go to work. And that last year at the start of it, it was. But I used that word grind. It worked. And this year, it was moving because I learned that if I wait between tasks or, you kind of stay too long thinking about how tired you are, you don't want to move. And I want you to just think about this for yourself. When do you feel the most fatigued when you're saying doing a hit session or a run session? Run's a really good example. You go for a run. There's a reason why joggers will be at a set of lights jogging on the spot because they're going to feel way more tired if they stop that momentum. And so, what I learned in work too is between tasks, between ideas, between structure, getting your day going, anything, just like move to the next task. Like, don't overthink it, don't negotiate it, just move. And so, moving has been this word of mine, and man, it works. Instead of getting, caught up, just distracting yourself or scrolling on social media, it's just like, hey, move to the next task. And what's great is that I'm moving to the next task and I'm in it. I've been just sitting here ranting on podcasts. Even though I'm talking about the deficit, I haven't felt terrible. I feel great because I'm evolved, I'm involved, and I am very immersed within the task that I need to do. And so I'm staying present and time flies when you're focused on something that you want to do well. That's what's really important. So definitely taught me to major thing, hard times create hard people. And what that really means, I mentioned, I get it. Like I get, when you see someone who already has a hard life and then they do something that's hard, like, how do you do that? Because they're just used to hard. And to me, I almost like now understand the David Goggins mindset where it's just he's just so used to hard that it's a normal thing. Now I don't want to live here, but it definitely has taught me in my next phase like of life, in the summer, and I wanted to come out of this a different person to be able to use this skill for my job more and to be able to lean into discomfort more and to create some sort of accountability structure where I can lean into this more for my job. And I think I just want to know that I have to be honest and know I'm capable of more and more often based on how I'm handling this challenge. And here's the really crazy part for you as I come close to wrapping this up. This is not the hardest part. You might think you have 1,400 calories, you're doing cardio every day, you're doing your workouts still. How is this not the hardest part? Well, that, my friend, is because I still have to reverse out of this. Okay. So reverse dieting is something I've never done well. I did it okay in the fall, did it okay. But reverse dieting is basically where you work your way backwards into your low calorie maintenance so that you don't blow up and you don't want to yo-yo diet. You don't want to binge. I want to come out with a better physique than I had going into it. And I'm still even doing research on it. Like, what is the right calorie progression? Where do I even start? And, you know, even like socially, I'm going into the summer. Like, it's a really tough time of year to actually keep yourself calm. So, I still even need to do cardio. Like right after the week after, I still got to do cardio. So I'll be dialing it down. And I'm going to do another podcast on this. I'm going to talk to Brett about this on the next podcast, how he helps his clients go through it. And, I've heard some people talk, the slower you go, the better your results are after, as far as the physique that you retain. And that's one of the major things I'm hoping to retain, is a better set point. So that's why I'm not orchestrating as this being the hardest thing. This might be some of the lowest energy, but that doesn't make it actually the hardest, because there's not going to be any glory there, right? That people are really significantly aware of. It's easy to go and be aware of, like, other people are competing against me for a stage right now. But the analogy I give people is climb up a rope and climb up a rope so long that your hands are bleeding. And then someone's going to tell you to slowly come down that rope at the exact same pace. And your hands are bleeding, by the way. And the reason why I really even like that analogy is because it works with like eccentric loading. Like, it's harder to go down a rope than up a rope on your muscles and on your hand and on your grip and on your mind. That's why people just want to fall off, right? Keith Billows was like my third podcast. He had such great wisdom in it because he had climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. So it's just like business, it's just like life. Climbing the mountain isn't the hardest part. Going down the mountain is the most dangerous, because you literally are going with gravity. You can slip, you can fall, and people just don't even think about it. People aren't even aware of it. People aren't prepared for it. And that's why I'm very aware that this next phase, at least I'm prepping myself mentally to know that that is going to be the hardest thing. But one of the coolest things you get from something like this is a self-realization. It's not if, it's when, right? It's not if I can do this, it's when I do it. The question I continue to ask, and I make sure I ask myself daily, is who am I while I do it? And I want to make sure I become present, and I want the challenge. I want that part. And that really does change everything. It makes it all worthwhile, and it helps change your character so much more. Um, you know, Tom Bilyeu had this beautiful description of, he's just someone I recommend you check out his podcast. He was the owner of Quest, the supplement brand, and he had this great discussion with Alex Hormozy. He had said, it's not about the party after the mountain climb. Like, you could have a party, imagine a mountain, the biggest party and celebration, booze, orgies, all that stuff, that desserts, anything. But the thing that you remember the most is like right before the edge. That, like, the thick that I'm in now is like, I want to look back at it and it's like, man, I can't believe how much work I did right before. I got client meetings next week that I'm like, you know what? I was thinking I wasn't going to do that, but I'm glad I'm doing it. I'm glad I'm trying to be present still to hear from my clients and trying to push myself, because that's where you're going to reflect on as well. That's the sweet part of it, is like, what did I accomplish? Not just how good did the wine taste after. And it's not going to taste really good unless you earned it and you put everything into it. And so my my philosophy lifestyle changed a lot. Rather than I can't wait for this, I said, why can't I recognize this now? It was prepping for a shoot years ago where I was still in school, and but things that was an important part, because I was like very disciplined in school, and I was very disciplined in my diet. My physique was getting better than ever. I was hitting my training, I wasn't getting distracted with, video games or anything like that, doing cardio. I was doing everything I needed to. I was about 2 weeks or so out. And I just remember thinking to myself, I can't wait for this to be over. And then a voice came over my head and said, why? Why can't you be proud of who you are right now? Why can't you, take ownership and realize that this is actually the best version of you is when you're doing this. That's when everything changed. That's when I understood where happiness exists. And that's why I understood that, when I fell off and I would, binge eat and be like, oh man, I need a challenge. I need to get a photo shoot going or something. I need this or I need that, because we actually crave it. We crave these challenges. And I realized that there is happiness within those states, but we actually need to bring ourselves to the happiness within the state of the challenge. You need to be like, I am so excited that I am suffering. I am so excited that I have a purpose and I have a drive and I'm conquering this right now. I'll go back to that moment where I was toe to toe with that guy and to just keep living that again and again and again, thinking about my marathon where I had moments of like, hey, just another step, thinking of the half marathon I did with my brother where I couldn't breathe. But I'm leaning into this. Like those moments will stay solidified in my mind forever. And that is happiness that I even get to carry with me. So as I mentioned, this is a really important podcast because I've had a lot to reflect on. I'm in the thick of it mentally and physically. And I'll do many other like summary podcasts, but I thought it was going to be super helpful for you to get that reflection on how things have changed in training, in the nutrition, what I've learned from it. And again, there's even more lessons coming up, but a whole lot, especially on the mindset thing, especially being in the thick of it right now. So that's why I'm so big on the whole mantra of this program. And I hope you got a lot from this episode. Please share it. Please like, subscribe, and all that stuff. Especially because I put, I think there's a cool story here for anyone to value, as far as character evolution and stuff like that goes. But you for sure. I really want you to appreciate and value that you're putting in hard work, and you got to see it. You got to see it as that. I've said this a lot recently because people say, "Oh, you inspire me." People like you inspire me because you go to work every day and you do a whole lot of work that you don't want to do. I am so lucky that I am a fitness guy that can chase his fitness, pursuits and all these things, and I got time to do it. You're putting in work, you're doing things, and especially if you're listening to me and trying to understand training and nutrition, you don't get it. Like that's hard. That stuff is hard. So just recognize where you are putting in your work, recognize where you are pursuing that, and embrace that. Like embrace that. Hey, you know what? I am doing this. I am doing something shitty, but I can do this really painful, shitty thing well. And I can embrace that I'm the person that can do that. And that's where you start getting character strength. Character strength is the true strength of life. Okay. Find that moment of happiness within these things. That's how you chase your ambitions. That's how you become an ambitious person. And that's why it's the Strong Ambition podcast. Remember, my friend, it is not about the pursuit of happiness. It's about the happiness within your pursuit. And I'll catch you next time.